Video. Today we're doing two NFL player props here on PrizePicks for Sunday, September 29th. This is the Sunday NFL slate here. I got two player props that I am targeting from this slate, but before I get started, take a look in the description below. Hop into the premium Discord. $9.30 per month, 31 cents per day is what it comes down to. So I post all the plays I'm making on PrizePicks. We also have other captors in there as well, posting all of their plays. Super positive community, you guys. Everyone in there just trying to help each other cash. I also want to mention I'm not a gambling expert, and this is not financial advice. These simply just plays I'm personally looking at making, hopefully giving you guys some insight and analysis to make your own player prop decisions here. Again, no one's pressing submit on those parlays other than yourselves. But let's take a look here really quickly before we get started as well at Daily Grind Fantasy. Again, I talk about it in every video, but this is a research betting tool that I do use every single day, you guys. The DFS Optimizer, to me, is the most elite tool you can use to become a more profitable sports bettor, in my opinion. The DFS Optimizer does all the hard work for you. For example, the top play on the board currently, and again, this does update regularly, is going to be Justin Fields under 17 fantasy score. 53.77 odds to hit, and sometimes there's even plays on here that have like a 55% odds to hit or even 56% odds to hit. Because traditional sports books don't have fantasy score lines, you can see here, like, based on his rushing yards, passing yards, pass TDs lines on Pinnacle's line for his fantasy score line, if he did have one on Pinnacle, it'd be 15.2. It's 17 on PrizePicks, giving us here a discrepancy, obviously 53.77% odds to hit. There's a link in the description below of the video. You can use that link along with promo code TUFF. You get 25% off your first month, you guys. Daily Grind Fantasy. I'll talk about it a little bit more at the end of the video, but let's get into this video. Two free player props, NFL Sunday, September 29th. Let's get after it. So the first play I'm looking at here is going to be George Pickens over 11 fantasy score here against the Indianapolis Colts. Taking a look at this one, first off, this game is being played indoors in Indianapolis, and just historically, I guess really over the course since the Colts have been playing on this field, it just produces better offense. I think across the board in the NFL, and I think many of you guys can agree that when games are played indoors like this on the turf, it just creates for better football, in my opinion, as far as just visually, aesthetically pleasing, I guess, and just higher scoring games, right? I think offenses, generally speaking, are more productive indoors. That's not the reason I'm taking this play, but I just wanted to mention that. 1.5 point spread, 40.5 over under. So Vegas not predicting this game to be super high. I'd probably maybe even take the under on this game total if you were obviously looking to place that type of bet. But nonetheless, George Pickens, you guys, having a career year, in my opinion, so far in this short season. I think he's obviously established himself as the wide receiver one. Currently on books, DraftKings has a minus 135 to get us 50 receiving yards. Minus 135, minus 142 on Caesars for 50 receiving yards. So you can kind of see Vegas, liking him heavily to at least 50 receiving yards. It's actually opened at 52.5. But we look at George Pickens in his career when he does get 50 receiving yards, okay? This is 11 PPR fantasy points that we need to hit the over on this. We look at last season. In games when he had at least 50 receiving yards, he hit the over on this line in every game except for one against Cincinnati, where he had 3 catches for 58 yards, finishing with 8.8. But every other game last season when he had 50 receiving yards, he cleared 11 fantasy points. We even go back to the year before his rookie season. Again, this is a young receiver still. You can see here in games that he had at least 50 receiving yards, he hit the over on this line in every game except for 2, finishing with 7.3 and 8.7. In both those games, only 2 catches and 3 catches. Obviously, he is now the wide receiver one in this offense. I think he actually dominates the air yards for this team. We can see here, air yards for the team. George Pickens, the 4th highest in the NFL as far as team percentage of air yards. 50.8 of the team's air yards, percent of the team's air yards go to George Pickens. Now, like I said, the Indianapolis Colts are a strong matchup for George Pickens. If we look at kind of the defense versus position here, I think the Colts are like bottom 10 in the NFL production, especially PPR fantasy points to the wide receiver position. Actually, they are 5th most PPR fantasy points to the wide receiver, 26.9 PPR fantasy points per game they allow to the wide receiver position. And besides Pat Freiermuth and checkdowns to Jalen Warren, like, there's really, like, this wide receiver 2, I think, is Calvin Austin. George Pickens is the wide receiver 1. I think in a competitive game where, at least the Steelers are trying to throw the ball, George Pickens should see minimum 7 targets, I think. If we kind of look at how his targets have been broken down so far this season, besides this game against Pat Surtain, which, again, he's shut down pretty much every wide receiver 1 over the last year. He had 13.5 PPR fantasy points on 7 targets against Atlanta. And if you watch this game, even against Pat Surtain, he did get a couple flags called on catches that he made, right? Or like holding calls on catches he made. So this is a little bit skewed in my opinion as well, but 10.7 against the Chargers last week when both teams were really just looking to run the ball in that one as well. But then we just look at wide receivers, PPR fantasy points this season versus the Colts. Like Rome Odunze just last week had 23.4. Stephon Diggs had 21.9. Nico Collins 17.7. DJ Moore 15.2. Natavion Wicks 11.6. And then Romeo Doubs 9.2. Tank Dell 8.9. So we've seen 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different wide receivers come within 2 fantasy points, 2.1 fantasy points of this 11 fantasy score line. Again, I would play this at 11.5. If it does bump, by the time, again, I'm recording this video a little bit before Sunday, obviously. So if this line does bump, I would play this at 11.5. I want to let you guys know that at 11.5 bump, I will absolutely still play this line. So George Pickens over 11 fantasy score for me is going to be the first play. The second play here that I'm looking at is going to be Kyler Murray. I got to go back to Kyler here. I know we took him last week, and he sold for us at 20 fantasy score against the Detroit Lions, and he just has an absolute elite matchup this week against the Washington Commanders, who have shown they are a very competent offense. So I'm expecting this game to be pretty much just a shootout, right? This is not like the Commanders teams of last year where their defense was horrible and their offense was horrible. They have the offense to keep up in these games. So you can see here, this has the highest game total on the slate. 50.5 over under, 3.5 point spread. Cardinals are actually 3.5 point favorites. This is a home game for Kyler Murray here. Taking a look at a few things. Over on Outlier, you guys, there's a link also in the description. You get a 7-day free trial. Pass TDs against Washington Commanders have allowed the most passing touchdowns in the NFL this season. They rank dead last. Kyler Murray, over 1.5 passing touchdowns. The odds for this line, minus 145 on DraftKings, minus 154 on Caesar. So books favoring him here to throw 2 passing touchdowns, right? Just generally speaking, those are pretty juiced overs for passing TD lines. Let's just go back to 2020 when Kyler Murray had at least 2 passing touchdowns. You can see the fantasy score totals here on this left side, fantasy DK. Elite fantasy score totals when he throws 2 passing touchdowns because of that rushing upside, in my opinion. Going back to 2021, which to me was probably one of his best seasons, you can see the fantasy score totals, you guys, when he throws 2 passing touchdowns. Or not, this is PPR. Hold on, let me go to DraftKings real quick. Fantasy score totals when Kyler Murray throws 2 passing touchdowns: 22.9, 30.8, 22.6, 22.4, 38, 25, and 34.6. Absolutely smashing this 20 fantasy score line, 20.5. Even just, I think this is when he tore his ACL, or 2022. Yeah, this is when he tore his ACL. When he threw 2 passing touchdowns that season, over this line or 20 plus fantasy points in almost every game. And went over this line in almost every game except for this one, 20.0 fantasy points PPR or DraftKings. So again, Washington Commanders, like I said, allowing the absolute most fantasy points to the quarterback position, the most. And this is all really pocket play, right? It's not like they faced really an elite quarterback that's as elite as Kyler Murray is at running the ball. We kind of look at the fantasy score totals, right? Daniel Jones, Joe Burrow, and Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield had 29.7, Daniel Jones 18.3, Joe Burrow had 25.4, right? And we look at the rushing yards for these guys. Baker Mayfield ripped off 21 rushing yards. Joe Burrow is obviously not going to run the ball, and then Daniel Jones had 32, right? So the floor for this play, I think, is going to be like 18, 19 fantasy points if Kyler has a bad game, giving him that much more upside, I think, with the rushing stats that he can easily acquire. And even going back to last season, right? Something interesting, we look at fantasy score game logs, quarterbacks versus the Commanders. We look at the types of players that had massive games. Like, we look at quarterbacks that are considered rushing quarterbacks. Josh Allen, 22.3. Jalen Hurts, 27.4 and 24.2. And then Justin Fields, 33 fantasy points last season. Very similar rushing profile to Kyler Murray. Threw 282 yards and 4 passing touchdowns in that one. Only 51.7 passing completion percentage, but just absolutely dominated. So I really like this spot for Kyler Murray. I really like this spot for George Pickens, you guys. 2 plays Sunday, September 29th. NFL Sunday slate here. Again, wanted to mention Daily Grind Fantasy again, you guys. Again, a tool that I do use on the daily basis. This updates regular time, you guys. This updates books, sports books lines move all the time. So this is updating real time. I like Daily Grind Fantasy a lot. They got other tools as well. And then if you're on Dabble, Hot Streak, Sleeper, Underdog, Parlay Play, Better Picks, whatever platform you're on, they have an optimizer for those platforms as well. So again, you guys, link in the description below, promo code TUFF, 25% off your first month. But again, 2 plays for this video. Pickens, 11 fantasy score. I would play this at 11.5. Kyler Murray 20.5. I would play this at 21. Honestly, I'd play the 0.5 bumps on both these plays. I'll put a comment if both these plays bump. I'll put a pinned comment mentioning those bumps and if I'll still play them or not. But again, please drop a like, you guys. Check out all the links in the description below. Hit that subscribe button, and as always, let's cash.